What's your survival imperative? What do you have to make sure happens or doesn't happen? Between knowing what you need to do and doing what you know you should be doing, what's keeping you from realizing your potential? Consider the octopus, one of the most intelligent creatures on the planet. The octopus of today is very much like it's been for thousands of years. Why did one of nature's best and brightest simply stop developing? Not because of some species octopusian failure. In fact, the opposite. The octopus species has been too successful. Look out, Craftsman. Look out, DeWalt. Octopus tool making can't be beat. And the tools they developed long ago to catch food worked. And those tools are still working. The end. Nature is nothing if not practical. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Thriving species, the ones that eat lunch at the cool species table, don't get there by accident. Species success is a marriage of convenience matching a tumultuous and unpredictable environment with a precise set of biological and behavioral ingredients, proportioned in such a way to ensure that octopuses happily maintain their station within the ecosystem hierarchy. Nothing more, nothing less. Organisms evolve out of necessity. Without an evolutionary imperative to change, there is no impetus for change. So what's your survival imperative? What do you need to change to remain vital and connected? Welcome to Willing to Win. If you're willing to think different, willing to work different, willing to change at the speed of now, then you're willing to win. Welcome to Willing to Win. I'm Jeff Kaplan.
And I'm Tara Thomas-Gettman. Out of everything you said in that From the Edge monologue, very insightful, I do have to ask, so the plural of octopus is octopuses?
I know we're going to get cards and letters. Keep those cards and letters coming, but you don't have to write about that. We have validated that that is the appropriate plural, although it sounded strange.
And it was very much a perfect analogy to what we are talking about, because when we say environmental impact, we don't mean, are you going green, are you recycling?
Yeah.
We mean the environment that is impacting the way leaders lead, and all of us can count ourselves as leaders.
Yeah, and I really hope that the people at home in our audience that are listening or watching, really take to heart the big question, and that is, what is your survival imperative? There are probably things going on in your life right now that will make the difference between whether or not you're personally or professionally successful. And when you think about it, change is really a matter of survival. Just imagine in the 1980s, right? If you were going in the 80s and this, you saw somebody that had this brick phone. Remember those brick phones, right? Yeah, brick phone.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's really cool. I want one of those. But you resisted, right? Saw the flip phone, but you still resisted, never got a BlackBerry, right? And you maintained your distance in never adopting cellular, never adopting a smartphone. How would you be able to even, operate in our environment today if you had denied change?
You would be totally disconnected, and sometimes we make that disconnection, by choice, because you hear people say, oh, I don't need that newfangled cell phone, or I don't need something that maybe seems like a change or a shift that they're not ready to completely embrace. But when it comes to work and the ways we work and do things, it's interesting how now things have shifted to where it's required, because you look at like the custodial staff in a school district, and for years I've worked with staff where some of them were checking their emails daily. In fact, they were probably getting emails around the clock, in contrast to an employee group like a more physical, labor-oriented set of people who would say, check email. I don't have time to do that in the course of my day, because it was not something that was a necessity until it was. Because now, not only are you getting a memo that you need or important information that will affect your work schedule, but you're getting a paycheck direct deposit. So I do know of cases where once that direct deposit was in place, people didn't realize that there was maybe one check a year that was a bonus or something in addition to their normal pay.
It was a physical check, yeah.
And the paper check, we were so used to direct deposit, they had to put the disclaimer, this is a real check, because it turned out a lot of people were tossing them in the garbage.
I had that problem once. It was a check from these people. I don't know if you heard them. It's called Publishers Clearinghouse. They sent the check, and I didn't think it was anything, so I just threw it away. But luckily, it was a really big check, so my wife was able to see it in the trash, took it out, and we cashed it. No, I'm kidding around, because we talk a little bit about, like checks like winning the Publishers Clearinghouse, or even winning the lottery, which isn't a high likelihood. I heard the other day that the likelihood of winning the lottery is you're 4 times more likely to die from an accident with a vending machine than winning, the lottery. So that's not very likely. But I think a lot of people imagine the opportunity to get a big sum of cash, more than you've ever dreamed before, suddenly available to you. They see that as an opportunity to go out and do good things for their family, do good things in the community. It's as if having a large sum of money gives them permission to lead within their own communities. And part of the Willing to Win message that we want to make sure everyone in our audience understands is we are giving you that permission. It's sort of like going through school, right? When you're in grade school and junior high and high school, there are bells that tell you go from one room to another. If you're not there on time, your parents, are informed, right? Regular report cards go home. But when you get to college, there aren't any bells. There's nobody telling you to show up for school. Your parents, for the most part, aren't involved in your education. You have to know what to do and what to adopt and where to be on your own. Those are your decisions. And I think it's really important that folks at home know 2 things. Number 1, you're not going to get a notification about the changes you need to make in your life, or how you can take advantage of changes that can help make you and your organizations more successful. And number 2 is that you've really got to show up for change and participate. You have permission to lead. Nobody needs to give you that permission. Just get involved.
Yeah, it's such an important message, and I'm so glad that you shared that, because I think so many people, especially those watching at home, that are not in a traditional, stereotypical leadership role, right? We talk a lot about business, so when you think about the CEO, the head boss, that person is one out of thousands who may never ascend to that position. But each of us, even if we're not on the job professionally, in our personal lives, we have the ability and we have the authority, the permission that Jeff is talking about, to take on and assume the leadership roles based on the environment that we're living within, but also taking on that sense of the bigger picture and the bigger responsibility to our communities, right? Because we as a mom or a wife or a father, all of us have leadership roles, because we're in a position to lead those that we've been charged with, interacting with, caring with, in some cases, paying the bills for as parents when it comes to our children. So I think people underestimate how much they're already executing leadership, because we fall into the stereotypical view of it.
Yeah, no question. I think people really get in the habit when we're young and we're told what to do and what to think and where to go and where to be and how to act. And we get our hands slapped if we're, outside of someone else's parameters, that when you're an adult, you don't need that permission. That permission is within you. And if you're exercising leadership in your community or in your family, you've already earned that right from the role that you've played to this point. So, you don't need anybody's permission. But if you do, Tara today is announcing that she's giving everyone, all of our listeners and all of their friends, permission to be leaders in their communities.
Oh, good. I was like, where's he going with this? Because if it involves, some monetary publisher clearinghouse windfall, then the check is going to bounce, people. All right, we'll be right back. We have some great insight from Alyssa Nolte, our socialite correspondent. Stay with us.
Willing to Win.
Thanks for staying with Willing to Win. I'm Tara Thomas-Gettman.
And I'm Jeff Kaplan.
And joining us is Alyssa Nolte, our socialite correspondent. We've been talking about leadership, and the really interesting statistic, if you will, that our research has uncovered is that over 60% of those surveyed, employees surveyed in a recent study, are stating that they believe that a boss, to be an effective leader, has to be okay with admitting his or her mistakes, which we find so interesting because traditionally, years ago, and how it was often portrayed in Hollywood, the boss has to elicit strength, and he can't, don't let him see you cry, because it would look like you were a weak and not an
no crying
ineffective
in
leader.
baseball.
Exactly.
Right? Tom Hanks line, right? No, I totally agree. And it's very interesting, where we've come, because if you just follow the history of leadership development, leadership research, you find out that the very first research attempts were, what are the characteristics of a leader? And then people, examined that, and they said, is it a trait? Were you born with it? Could you learn it? We went through all these iterations, and now we're down to these very specific items. But in the middle, back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there was a guy named Daniel Goldman, and he had a thing called emotional intelligence. And I think the 5 components were self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. And I think that was sort of the underlying theory and thinking that went into this. And now people are going to say, what does that self-reflection mean? What is your ability to look in the mirror and accurately see who you are? How does that play out? And then what can you show of yourself safely and be effective?
And that's the key word, safely, because I think years ago, we didn't feel that we had permission to be our authentic selves, right? It's like, oh, I show up at work, and you've talked about this before, how sometimes people almost live a double life. Like, the person you are at work may not be who your family and friends know you to be. So what Alyssa is going to speak to is how we've really evolved in a good way into a space of being authentic and exuding that vulnerability can happen across the board seamlessly in our lives. We don't have to check our vulnerability at the door when we walk into work.
Socialite.
In fact, you should actually not check your vulnerability at the door. There's new research coming out from Brené Brown, and she talks about the vulnerability in leadership and how important that aspect is to be a truly effective leader. So you talked about the 5 components of emotional intelligence. She has 5 components of why vulnerability matters for leadership. Number 1, recognize that it's not a weakness. Leaders can be vulnerable, and it doesn't make them weak. Number 2, there are benefits to opening up, more to employee morale and your culture, but also vulnerability leads to innovation and creativity. Organizations that are led by a vulnerable leader are much more likely to be innovative and creative and come out with new and amazing products because people feel comfortable sharing their ideas and coming to the table with something new and different that sets their company apart. Number 4, you will do vulnerability knowingly, or vulnerability will do you. Now, we talk about this a lot with change. Either you're going to embrace it or you're going to ignore it, but either way it's coming. Same thing with vulnerability. And that really means that the choice to embrace exposure, to dive into vulnerability, to be vulnerable with your peers and with your leaders and with the people who report to you, that's a great way for you to connect with those people. And it's much easier to just embrace it and go with it than have it take you.
Yeah, and I think it's important to sort of dig in on that one idea of whether you do or don't, it's going to happen, right? Because that crops up again and again when it comes to change. There are groups of folks that think if I just, avoid change completely, that, it's just going to go away or I don't have to deal with it, right? But the thing we want to emphasize is because these things are going on with or without us, having no decision, right? Or avoiding something is a decision in and of itself. And the thing is, most of us are struggling to try to find some control in our life because ultimately, in the end, we have no control over what happens. All of us will end up, with the same sort of,
Fate,
yes, in the end. But, between now and then, it is a very comforting psychological state to feel like you have some control. So it makes no sense to me that the very same groups of people that are looking for that control most because they're most insecure about the future, they're most insecure about their understanding of change or the world around them, those very same people are the ones that decide not to make decisions, and in doing so are basically surrendering any chance they have at some semblance of control. So I think
That's
that was
a good point.
Really good piece that you brought in.
And when she talked about that vulnerability, you have mentioned this in the past, if you come off as uncaring, cold, unwilling to be, a listening ear as a leader, it can be detrimental to those that you are, charged with overseeing, in that they may no longer see you as someone they can relate to, or just, a human, someone who makes mistakes, which is why it was so interesting to me that is now admittedly one of the driving factors in terms of what employees feel they want to see reflected in a leader. And so I think that means we're coming to a place where we've evolved as a culture And we now can let people be their true selves, and that means it's okay if your boss cries watching American Idol.
Or The Bachelor.
Right. Whatever show,
Not
you
that I
know.
would cry on The Bachelor.
Or Air Bud.
Air Bud, my husband's famous cry fest, which is not to be disrespected. I embrace that about him, right? And that's the thing that Brené Brown has done, especially for women, is given us permission to be emotional when in fact in the past that was a gender stereotype that was used against us. Like, don't cry in front of your boss if you're a woman. And I've probably cried in front of all of mine over the years. And I'm now owning that as being okay, because that doesn't mean that I'm erratic or not a stable person. It just means that I'm passionate and comfortable with sharing my emotion with people like my boss or my coworkers, because I'm being my authentic self. And that's who should show up for work, is your true self.
Absolutely. And I think there has to be something said for, you just talked about having permission as a woman, but I think we all need permission to be our authentic selves, whether you're a man, whether you're a woman. Sure. Like, men cry too, as we talked about with American Idol and Air Bud. People have these emotions, and if we let them come out, if we give ourselves permission, that inherently gives permission to those around us to be authentic and truly themselves as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for joining us for Season 4 Leadership, another mini season as we roll out really a lot of life lessons as part of our Willing to Win mission. When you talk about the question that we need to sort of move forward with after we reflect on what we shared today, how can somebody walk away and feel good about what they're doing and how they're going to maybe, tweak some of their leadership in years and months to come?
Yeah, the challenge for those that are listening today or watching us is really, to ask yourself, are you a leader? And if so, how are you showing leadership? I think it's really important. We all act as leaders in our lives, but many of us, don't necessarily believe that or see that. And so just by going through the simple exercise, even in your head, you don't have to write anything down, right? Just think about the different places where you act as a leader, where you're showing the way, maybe as a parent, maybe in your community and in your organizations. And then if you're not doing that, or you should be doing it in other areas, you have to ask yourself, why not? And if it's just simply a matter of permissions that you don't think you can, you don't think you should, and you can provide that permission for yourself, take it. If you do need some kind of permission to do something in an organization that might be considered leadership or outside, your normal purview, then have the wherewithal, have the guts, have the self-belief to go to that boss or that supervisor or that team that you work with and ask for that permission. And you're going to be very surprised by the results that you get. I think that, with the very rare exception, that will be embraced.
That's great advice. So as a recap for our season of leadership, in the last episode, we really talked about just the definition of leadership. Jeff did a quick Google search and there were billions of answers. So just diving into how do we execute leadership in our daily lives? And even though there's a billion definitions, it's actually a simplistic approach in that you have permission to execute leadership.
And what's great is Alyssa will be back in the next show going through each of those definitions for us, one at a time. Just the first 1.5 billion on the next episode.
I'm gonna filibuster the next episode of Willing to Win, it sounds like.
That's it. That's an exciting show.
Mark time on your calendars for that. We talked about exercising leadership as our environment is perpetually changing around us today. And coming up in the next episode, and as we close out this leadership season, we're going to touch on how much information we're consuming and how we can actually utilize it to be effective leaders. And finally, how are we going to exercise leadership, as Jeff said, not just to help ourselves, but the people around us. So it's an exciting topic and one that you've researched for years. So it's fun for you to impart some of what you've gleaned over decades of research.
Absolutely, and we look forward to seeing you in our next episode.
WillingToWin.org is the website to check out more. Win.org. We'd love to connect with you on social media. Tag at Dr. Jeff Kaplan. That's our leadership guru here, and we'd love for him to be able to engage with you on social media. Or the hashtag W2W Legion. You're a part of our Legion here at Willing to Win, and we want to hear from you. So join the conversation and have a great day.
These episodes are the first reports filed from the front lines of change, where a growing legion of individuals and organizations are discovering what it takes to win and stay winning in a world defined by change and driven by interconnected human networks.
Willing to Win is produced by Lift Productions. Guests on the program are not compensated, nor is their appearance representative of the Willing to Win views. Willing to Win does not necessarily endorse any people, products, or services.